Security radioed for backup 3 times before anyone understood why. At the checkpoint, an old man refused to move. Not shouting, not confused, just immovable. Eyes locked on the USS Brimstone like he'd been waiting 60 years. Guards shifted uneasily, one starting to snap cuffs on his belt. Lieutenant Dalton cut him off. Hold position. Then she saw it stitched into the man's sleeve. A triangle split by lightning, nearly erased by time. The sight froze her breath. She'd seen that symbol once, in a briefing she was never meant to remember. Within minutes, the launch would grind to a halt. An admiral would leave the podium, and the Navy's most buried history would claw its way into daylight. And it all began. The morning the docks of New Halley Naval Base shimmered under camera flashes. The docks of New Halley Naval Base shimmered under camera flashes. News crews jostled for angles while families waved flags at the USS Brimstone, the Navy's newest guided missile destroyer, bristling with classified technology. Lieutenant Grace Dalton ran perimeter security with precision. ID scan, face match, guest list cross-check. No exceptions. The Secretary of Defense was attending. One breach could end careers. The old man appeared at her gate without warning. 70s, maybe. Canvas cap, faded windbreaker, invitation crushed soft at the edges. Sir. Guests proceed to Zone C. Dalton didn't look up. I'm going aboard. His voice was gravel dragged over rust. That made her look. No badge, no bearing. Just calm, steel-gray eyes that seemed to measure the destroyer. Not her. Sir, deck access requires clearance. That's the Brimstone? He cut her off, nodding toward the ship. Arleigh Burke class, Flight 3 variant. You changed the radar mast configuration. Good call. The old one harmonized badly in high seas. Dalton froze. That adjustment wasn't public. How do you know? The intake's still port bow? His finger traced the waterline. You'll cavitate at 12 knots in cold water. Same failure your prototype had. Her stomach dropped. That exact flaw was buried in classified sea trials. Who are you? He didn't answer. His gaze lingered on the hull, number DDG 137. Something flickered behind his eyes. Not nostalgia. Wait. Dalton's thumb touched her radio. 2 sailors walking by stopped mid-step, their eyes locked on the old man's sleeve. A patch, almost invisible. A triangle split by a jagged line, threads sun-faded to ghosts. One sailor swore under his breath. That's no. That unit's a myth. Keep moving, Dalton snapped, but her own throat was tight. She stepped closer, squinting. Sir, that insignia. And the world shifted. For a blink, she wasn't on the pier. She was back at Annapolis, 3 years ago, in a classified lecture. Grainy slides of wreckage. A torn sleeve with the same shape stitched by hand. The instructor's warning. If you ever see this symbol in the wild, you call your CO. Immediately. The memory vanished. Dalton's hand gripped her radio. Gate command. I have a situation civilian, unidentified insignia. Her watch commander crackled back, annoyed. Description. She swallowed. Male. 70 plus. Wearing triangle patch. Lightning through it. The silence lasted 3 beats too long. Then a new voice cut in. Cold. Absolute. This is Admiral Newman. Hold him there. Do not let him leave. I'm coming down. The channel went dead. Dalton lowered the radio, staring at the man. He hadn't moved. He hadn't even blinked. Around them, the crowd buzzed impatiently, cameras turning their way. A teenager muttered, "Why's that old guy holding up the line?" Dalton ignored them. Her eyes were fixed on the patch, and on the man who wore it like he'd carried it back from the grave. Rear Admiral Leonard Newman didn't run. Admirals never ran. But his stride across the Brimstone's deck came dangerously close. His aide struggled to keep pace. "Sir, the secretary is waiting. Tell the secretary we have a situation," Newman snapped. His jaw was granite. "Tell him we have a 27R on the pier." The aide's face went white. "That can't be. That unit. I know what the files say." Newman's tone cut like a blade. He had seen the patch once before. Pentagon, 23 years ago. A briefing after midnight. Closed room, no transcripts. A slide of wreckage in the South China Sea, blown up grainy and black and white. On the torn sleeve of a corpse, barely visible. A triangle split by lightning. The old captain giving the lecture had hesitated before speaking. His voice had carried guilt. Task Group 27R. Ghost Ops. 7 men. USS Raptor. No official launch, no official missions, and no survivors. Someone had asked, so they never existed? The captain's eyes had lingered on that photo. If they never existed, why do I still have nightmares? Now Newman hit the gangway at a near jog. Officers looked up, startled. The ceremony timetable was crumbling, press restless, VIPs checking watches. Vaughn, his XO, barked into his headset. We're 8 minutes behind schedule, Admiral. Schedule be damned, Newman growled, pushing past. If a man wearing that patch was on his pier, then either history had lied, or history had walked back from the grave. Thomas Grady watched the Admiral approach. His heart didn't race. It slowed. 60 years collapsed into seconds. He remembered the Raptor diesel lungs and stealth plating, purring quieter than a cat in a church. They had called him the listener. He could diagnose engine faults with his fingertips, feel tension in the hull the way a doctor hears a bad lung. 7 men. 1 patch. Hand stitched under red light, stolen thread, a vow in cloth. Their last mission had been routine. 40 minutes, in and out. Extract 3 stranded operatives from a cave north of Camran Bay. The cave collapsed. Grady still carried the sound, the roar of stone, the screech of steel imploding, the reactor shielding groaning under impossible strain. He had been waist-deep in burning coolant, slamming valves with raw hands, while men screamed on the other side of a sealed bulkhead. 4 drowned. 2 burned. The ship died. And he surfaced alone, clinging to wreckage, delirious with the vibration of ghosts in his ears. The Navy had debriefed him in a windowless room, gave him a pension and silence. The Raptor never existed. Your crew never lived, but the patch remained. Newman stopped 3 feet from him. Neither man spoke. Then Newman raised his hand in a salute so sharp it froze the pier. Admirals did not salute civilians, but this wasn't a civilian. Dalton saw it and her world tilted. Around them sailors whispered, "Admiral just saluted, what the hell?" Newman lowered his hand. His voice was steel wrapped in respect. "Mr. Grady, it's been a long time." Grady's answer was quiet. "You know what, I survived. And I know you wouldn't be here unless it mattered." Newman's words carried so every sailor could hear. Grady pulled the yellowed envelope from his jacket. Wax seal cracked and resealed too many times. He held it like a warning. "The Brimstone has the same flaw that killed the Raptor. Intake placement, coolant harmonics. I've been watching the Burke class since they laid the first keel. Nobody fixed it." His hand shook once. "She's a time bomb." Dalton felt the air shift. Engineers within earshot turned pale. Newman asked evenly, "How bad?" Grady's stare was unflinching. "1 storm. 1 high-speed chase in heavy water. 90 seconds from crack to steam cloud. You'll bury your crew," Dalton whispered. "Our diagnostics never showed." "Diagnostics told me the Raptor was fine too." His voice cut her off like a blade. Then 6 men died screaming. The crowd had quieted. Even families at the barricade leaned in, sensing something was wrong. Newman turned to Dalton. "Get me the chief engineer. Now." "Sir, the secretary." "The secretary can wait. Lives cannot." Commander Vaughn arrived, flustered, holding a clipboard. "Admiral, the press is ready. SecNav is waiting. We cannot delay the launch." "The launch is over," Newman barked. "We don't move until I know she's safe." Vaughn bristled. "With respect, sir, you're taking advice from a ghost?" Grady's eyes locked on him. "Not anger, just an old, cold certainty. I'm the only reason you even have a ship to argue about. You can listen to me, or you can learn the same lesson my brothers did." "And what lesson was that?" Vaughn shot back. Grady's reply was a rasp that carried across the deck. "That steel never forgets its mistakes. It only waits for you to repeat them." The words settled like weight on every spine present. Newman turned. "Escort Mr. Grady aboard. Full access. Full honors." Dalton hesitated. "Sir, protocol." "Then change the protocol," Newman snapped. The guard stepped aside. Grady moved toward the gangway. Each step steady, deliberate. And as he passed, sailors who hadn't been ordered found themselves standing straighter, shoulders squaring, salutes half raised without even realizing why. Because some instincts run deeper than rank. The Brimstone's engine room was alive with heat and vibration. Pipes twisted like arteries. Coolant lines hissed softly, and turbines throbbed with the restrained strength of a predator in a cage. Chief Engineer Sarah Ortiz looked up, surprised, when Admiral Newman entered with an elderly civilian at his side. Her jaw tightened. "Sir, Who is this? You can't just bring You'll want to hear him, Newman cut in, steel in his voice. Mr. Grady has insight into your cooling system. Ortiz frowned, hugging her tablet closer. Sir, diagnostics cleared everything last night. No anomalies. Then it won't take long to prove him wrong, Newman replied. Grady didn't wait for permission. He moved slowly, eyes scanning every weld, every line of pipe. His fingertips brushed the manifold housing, as though feeling for a pulse. He stopped at a junction and tapped the steel twice with his knuckles. The faint ring echoed, too subtle for most ears. He pulled a coin from his pocket, placed it on the manifold. Bring turbines to 75%, he said. Ortiz blinked. Sir, this isn't procedure. Do it, Newman ordered. The throttle crew hesitated, then keyed in the command. Turbines roared, vibration humming through the deck. The coin trembled, wobbled, and then rattled in place like it was alive. Grady's voice cut through. 48 hertz. Harmonic resonance. Technicians exchanged uneasy looks. Ortiz scanned her readout. Sensors are green. No cavitation. No resonance logged. Grady gave a grim half-smile. Your sensors don't hear. Steel does. He pulled a pencil from a workbench, balanced it upright on the housing. The pencil danced, then toppled violently. Gasps rippled through the crew. Still unsatisfied, Grady grabbed a spool of thread from a toolbox. He dangled a length near the intake vent. The strand whipped back and forth in invisible currents. Tiny bubbles foamed, popping in rhythmic pulses. That's cavitation, he said, flat and final. The same flaw that killed the Raptor. Ortiz's eyes widened. She pressed fingers to her earpiece, recalibrating sensors manually. After a long beat, the screen flickered. A minor anomaly flashed red just outside tolerance, nearly invisible. Her breath caught. He's right, she whispered. The room shifted. The crew stared at the old man like he'd conjured ghosts. That was when Commander Vaughn stormed in, voice raised to drown the silence. Admiral, we cannot indulge this circus any longer. SecNav lands in 4 minutes. The press is demanding answers. If we don't launch on schedule, your career will be— My career can burn, Newman snapped. This ship doesn't leave until she's safe. Vaughn stepped in, face flushed. With respect, sir, you're jeopardizing billions in contracts and political capital because some old man banged on a pipe with a coin. Grady turned, his eyes cold as iron. 6 men died because an officer once said the same thing to me. Do you want their screams on your conscience too? For a moment, the humming of turbines seemed to morph into another sound in Grady's head, boiling coolant, steel rupturing, voices choking in the dark. His hand trembled against the pipe. He forced it still. Ortiz's voice cracked. Admiral, I've heard it. That faint ringing. I thought it was interference. I ignored it. Her face was pale. If we push her into rough seas, then we write another obituary. Grady finished. Newman fixed Vaughn with a stare that could freeze stone. Cancel the sea trials, effective immediately. Vaughn's jaw dropped. Sir, SecNav is expecting a speech and a launch in less than an hour. Then he'll get a speech about why his sailors are alive instead of dead. Newman shot back. Vaughn's nostrils flared. You'll take full responsibility for this delay? I'll take responsibility for keeping this ship afloat, Newman said, each word like a hammer. The commander's knuckles whitened on his clipboard. He wanted to push harder, but Newman's glare held. Vaughn spun on his heel and stormed out, the hatch slamming like a gunshot. The crew exhaled in unison. Grady's voice softened, but carried. Reposition the intake manifold 18 inches aft, away from laminar flow. Reinforce pump mounts with dampeners. Replace bolts with vibration-isolated fittings. Ortiz scribbled furiously. We can do it. It'll take weeks, but we can do it. Grady shook his head. Better weeks than funerals, one technician whispered. How did you know? Before the readings? Before the logs? Grady looked at him. Because ships talk, and if you don't listen, they bury you. The words landed heavy. Ortiz set her jaw, determination replacing doubt. We'll fix it, mister. Grady, you have my word. Newman nodded once, satisfied. Good. This ship doesn't move until he signs off. Grady gave no answer, only laid his palm flat on the manifold one last time. His lips moved, barely audible. She's quieter already. Ha. They climbed back toward daylight. Dalton intercepted them on the ladder. Her voice was hushed. Sir, is it true? We were minutes from disaster? Newman didn't break stride. Closer than you want to know. She looked at Grady. How can one man hear what an entire system can't? Grady paused. His eyes were tired, but unwavering. Because I've lived with the sound of a ship dying, you don't forget it. Ever. Dalton said nothing more. The weight of it sat heavy enough. On the weather deck, the chaos of ceremony pressed in. Families restless, press swarming, officers gesturing frantically at timetables. Vaughn was already arguing with staff, words clipped and furious. But the sailors who had witnessed the test whispered to others. The old man heard it. He saved the Brimstone. The rumor spread like flame through dry grass. When Grady stepped back into the sunlight, the murmurs followed him. Some salutes snapped without orders. Others simply straightened their backs when he passed. Instinct. Dalton trailed him, shaken but unwilling to admit it. For the first time, she didn't see a trespasser. She saw the ghost of a warship that refused to die. And she realized the ceremony hadn't been derailed. It had just been rewritten. The ceremony resumed an hour later, but it was no longer the same event. The crowd sensed it. Families pressed close to the barricades, phones up, whispers rippling. Every sailor aboard the Brimstone stood taller, as though the air itself had shifted. Admiral Newman walked to the platform with Thomas Grady at his side. Reporters jostled, confused. This wasn't on the program. Dalton followed a few steps back, eyes fixed on the old man who'd just forced an admiral to stop a warship. The microphone cracked. Newman's voice carried over the pier. This morning, I intended to speak about the future capabilities, systems, deployments. But first, I need to speak about memory. He turned to Grady. This man carries a name most of you have never heard. Task Group 27R, officially erased. But without them, this ship would not exist. Without him, she might never sail safely at all. A hush spread like fog. No applause. Just silence. Grady didn't bow, didn't wave. He simply stood, weathered hands at his sides, gaze on the horizon. Newman continued. Today, he heard what no computer, no diagnostic, no system detected. He heard the Brimstone's flaw, the same flaw that once killed his shipmates. Because of him, those men will not have died for nothing. He stepped back. Mr. Grady, what would you have us remember? And also we can. Headed Sputer. Grady moved forward slowly. His voice was rough, but steady. Remember that steel doesn't save you. People do. Remember that every bolt, every valve, every patch exists because someone once bled when it failed. And remember to listen, even when the numbers tell you not to. He reached into his jacket and unwrapped a small cloth bundle. Inside lay a battered brass compass, glass cracked, casing tarnished. This belonged to my CO, Commander James Rourke. He went down with the Raptor. They sent me this weeks later, told me to keep quiet. I carried it 60 years. He walked to the ship's bell, the oldest tradition of them all. With both hands, he placed the compass at its base. Not a relic, he said softly. A reminder, when you hear her engines, when you trust your lives to her hull, remember the men who didn't come back. He stepped back. Newman snapped a salute, crisp and sharp. Dalton followed, arm stiff but true. Then, without command, a voice rang out from the boatswain's mate. Attention on deck, Task Group 27R. The words hit like thunder. Every sailor aboard raised their hand in unison, saluting the old man on the quarterdeck. Hundreds of arms, hundreds of eyes, all locked on him. For a long heartbeat, Grady stood motionless. His eyes glistened, but he did not look away. Then, for the first time in 6 decades, he returned the salute. Precise, sharp, final. The silence broke not with applause, but with a roar. Not rehearsed, not polite. A raw sound of recognition, grief, and gratitude, surging from sailors and civilians alike. Dalton felt her throat tighten. She had wanted to cuff him at the gate. Now she stood at attention, heart pounding, knowing she'd just witnessed something that would outlive them all. Grady lowered his hand, turned, walked down the gangway. No guard stopped him. The crowd parted without a word. He vanished into the press of people, just another old man in a worn jacket. But behind him, the Brimstone gleamed, her crew still saluting, her bell marked by a compass that whispered of ghosts. Dalton exhaled. Who was Commander Rourke? Newman's eyes stayed on the horizon. The man who taught him to listen. On the pier, the speeches resumed. The ribbon cut. The cameras flashed. But everyone knew the truth. The Brimstone had been commissioned that morning. But she had been saved the moment Thomas Grady stepped onto her pier. And somewhere deep in her hull, Steel hummed softly. Not forgotten. Not gone. Listening.